Why was he staring at her wrist? The paintbrush trembled slightly in her hand, but not from fatigue. It was the way his shadow stopped beside her that made the air shift and stay still. A Navy SEAL, tall, squared shoulders, a man built for storms, had frozen mid-stride, eyes locked on her arm as if the rest of the hallway had ceased to exist. His chest rose once, then held, as though even time itself had lost its courage to move forward. She kept painting, slow, deliberate strokes across the metal door, white over rust, careful enough to disguise the tremor in her fingers. The smell of fresh paint clung to her skin. Her coveralls were spattered with days' worth of labor, but her posture carried a quiet dignity no uniform could erase. The barracks hallway was empty except for them, but his stare felt like a question she wasn't ready to answer, and he didn't ask, not yet. For weeks she had worked here, the quiet civilian painter assigned to a forgotten corner of the base. Most walked past her without a glance, the way people walk past maintenance crews, not knowing the years those hands might have held a rifle instead of a brush. Only a few noticed her limp. Even fewer noticed the tattoo. It was faded, softened by years of sun, and a simple emblem, wings and a trident, no name beneath it, but those who knew knew. Years earlier she had worn the same emblem in a place where the ocean wasn't a horizon but a threat. She had been young then, strong, fast, sharp-eyed, a rescue diver in a world where minutes decided who lived and who didn't. Her unit had been her family, until one night one mission had torn that family apart. The cold weight of that memory still lived in her bones, the smell of burning fuel across black water, the grip of a brother in arms pulling her to the raft, his breath ragged with pain. She had held his head above the waves until the chopper came, but by morning he was gone, and so was the life she had known. The Navy gave her medals, but medals don't warm empty chairs. They don't quiet the screams that echo long after the water closes. They don't give you back your voice when it comes to the lost. So she built a different life, silent, ordinary, work with her hands, stay out of the way, leave the past where it was buried, until now, until this SEAL stopped beside her and stared at the ink she could never erase. He didn't move, didn't speak, just looked, not at her face but at the story carved into her skin, the emblem that tied them to the same bloodline of service. The silence between them grew heavier, a silence filled with recognition neither had spoken aloud. Then without warning he stepped back. His boots snapped together, his hand lifted in a salute, sharp, perfect, and held. The hallway stilled. A corporal carrying a clipboard froze mid-step. Two young recruits stopped whispering. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade. Her breath caught. Salutes weren't for civilians, everyone knew that, but this wasn't about rules. "I know who you are," he said finally, voice steady. "You saved my brother." Her brush hovered in the air, dripping paint. For a moment she couldn't breathe. She had never asked for thanks, never expected anyone to remember. She had buried that night so deep it only came back in dreams that stole her sleep. And yet here it was, alive again, spoken into the stillness. The SEAL lowered his hand, then turned to the recruits. "Show respect," he said simply. "She's one of us." And they did. Heads bowed slightly as she passed. The clipboard was lowered, the whispers silenced. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was the kind of moment that sinks deep into a person and stays there. Her brush moved again, the strokes smooth, steady. But inside, something lighter shifted. A reminder that silent honor is still seen, even in the quietest corners. Yet as she dipped the brush again, her mind betrayed her. The night came rushing back uninvited. The cold, the waves, the weight of a body in her arms, and the last thing he had whispered before the sea stole his voice forever. "Don't let go." She hadn't, she never did. Not of him, not of the pain, not of the silence. Now, with this SEAL's words echoing in the hallway, she wondered, had she been carrying his ghost all this time, or had his ghost been carrying her? She set the brush down. her hand trembling now not from fatigue, but from memory. The recruits had gone, the corporal too. Only the SEAL lingered, watching her as if he knew there was more she wasn't saying, and there was. Something she had never told anyone, not even her unit, not even him. And she wasn't ready to tell it now. But the way his eyes stayed on her wrist, on the tattoo, told her that silence wouldn't hold forever. Because some truths, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of surfacing. And hers was rising. Why was she suddenly afraid of being seen? The paint had always been her shield. Layers over rust, strokes over scars. A job so simple it required nothing of her but time and silence. She had built her days around it, one door, one wall, one faded surface at a time. No one asked questions of painters. No one expected more than neat lines and steady hands. Until now. The SEAL hadn't left. Even after the recruits drifted away, he remained near the doorframe, his presence filling the hallway like a shadow she couldn't paint over. "You don't remember me," he said finally. His voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was lower, quieter. She shook her head once. No words, just the brush again sliding across steel, white swallowing rust. "My brother, you pulled him out of the fire." He took a slow breath, steadying something inside himself. "You held him till the bird came. He told us before the end. He said a woman saved him, a diver, said you didn't let go." The handle of the brush slipped in her grip, wet with sweat. She forced her hand steady. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she hadn't saved anyone that night. That survival is cruel math, one body above water, another slipping beneath. But her throat locked around the words. Instead, she asked, "Why does it matter now?" Her own voice startled her. It had grown rusty with disuse, softer than she remembered. "Because," he said, and for a moment his jaw worked, as though the answer was harder to say than a battlefield confession. Men don't forget the ones who save their blood. She wanted to laugh, but the sound died in her chest. If only he knew how much she had forgotten or forced herself to. Faces blurred by smoke and voices cut short mid-breath. She had built her silence on forgetting, and now this man threatened to crack it open. "Let it stay buried," she whispered. But his eyes didn't waver. Some things don't stay buried. Her pulse kicked, a warning. She turned away, dipped the brush again, dragged white across metal. She thought he might leave. Instead, she heard his boots shift, stepping closer. "You're limping," he said quietly. She froze. It wasn't accusation, but it felt like one. Most people ignored it, pretended not to notice the way her weight shifted unevenly, the stiffness in her stride. But he had noticed. Of course he had. Soldiers are trained to see weakness and to know what price carved it there. "It's nothing," she muttered. But the memory of cold steel on bone, of fire rolling across water, of a moment when she thought she'd never kick her legs again, it rose anyway. She pushed it down, harder than the brush against the door. He didn't press, not with words, but his silence pressed harder than questions ever could. Finally he said, "If you want me to walk away, I will, but I'll never forget, and neither should they." "They?" she asked, against her better judgment. "The ones walking these halls, the recruits, the officers, they should know what you gave." Her throat burned. She turned sharply, meeting his gaze for the first time. His face was carved with lines of service, scars too faint to name but deep enough to know. He wasn't a boy. He wasn't here for ceremony. He was a man who understood cost. And still, he didn't understand hers. "They don't need to know," she said, voice firm now, a steel she hadn't touched in years. "Respect is earned in silence as much as in action. You think they need stories. I say they need example." He studied her, as if memorizing every word. Then slowly he nodded. But the look in his eyes unsettled her. It wasn't agreement. It was recognition, as though he had glimpsed something she hadn't meant to show. At last he stepped back. His boots echoed once in the corridor, then again as he turned away. She let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The brush trembled in her hand again. When he disappeared around the corner, she lowered the brush, pressed her palm against her wrist, over the faded ink. The emblem still marked her, no matter how much she had tried to wash it away with work and years. Her past was not buried, it was waiting. And for the first time in years, she felt its weight stirring beneath her silence. She left the door half-painted. Her legs carried her outside before she knew why. The evening air struck cool against her damp skin. She walked past the motor pool, past the lines of barracks, into the edge of the base where the chain-link fence caught the last light of day. The limp slowed her, but she didn't stop until she reached the edge. She gripped the fence with paint-stained hands and stared beyond it, to where the horizon melted into a wide stretch of ocean. The water had once been her world, her battlefield, her graveyard. And standing there, she felt the pull again, not of the sea, but of something buried in it. Because she hadn't told him everything, she hadn't told anyone. There was another truth to that night, one she had carried in silence, heavier than metals, heavier than scars. And she knew it wasn't going to stay hidden forever. Why was the ocean louder in her head than the base around her? She gripped the chain-link fence, paint still drying on her fingers, the metal imprinting her skin. Beyond the wire, the waves rolled steady, indifferent. Their rhythm was familiar, too familiar. Every crash carried echoes of a night she had buried under years of silence. She closed her eyes. The memory came uninvited. Fuel burning on black water, men shouting through smoke, a body slipping beneath her grasp, another hand clutching her vest, pulling her towards survival while someone else sank. The weight of two lives in one set of lungs, the impossible choice. She opened her eyes quickly, forcing the horizon to still. Inside the base, laughter echoed faintly from the mess hall. Boots thudded along asphalt. An engine revved. Life carried on. She them, those who could walk past her without seeing the shadow she dragged. But he had seen, the seal. His words clung to her, heavier than the smell of paint on her coveralls. You saved my brother. Did he know the whole truth? No, he couldn't. If he did, he wouldn't have saluted. He wouldn't have asked recruits to respect her. He would have turned away like the others, or worse, looked at her with the pity she despised. She pressed her wrist against the fence, the tattoo hidden under pale scars. The ink had outlived the man it honored, outlived the family she lost, outlived the silence she thought she could hold forever. A voice behind her broke the air. You don't belong out here. She stiffened. Slowly, she turned. A young corporal stood a few paces away, clipboard tucked under his arm. The same one who had frozen earlier when the salute broke the hallway silence. His face was lean, too young to be hardened, but his eyes lingered on her with something sharper than curiosity. She said nothing. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable but unwilling to leave. That seal, he knew you. Her throat tightened. Who are you? He asked. She almost laughed at the question. Who was she now? A painter with a limp, a shadow with a brush, or the ghost of someone who used to matter? I'm no one, she said. His brow furrowed. No one gets saluted like that, not here, not by him. She turned back to the fence. Hopping silence would end it, but the corporal didn't move. He said you were one of them, the young man pressed. Special. That tattoo, it's Navy, right? Combat. Her pulse quickened. She hated the way questions dug at old wounds, but she could see it in his eyes, the same hunger she'd once carried as a recruit. The hunger to know, to be connected to a story bigger than yourself. Go back to your duties, she said. For a moment she thought he would, but instead he whispered, I lost my brother too. Her grip on the fence loosened. She turned again. His gaze was steady now, stripped of curiosity, softened by grief. He was a Marine, the corporal continued. Afghanistan, didn't come home, he swallowed. When I saw the salute, I thought maybe you'd understand. Her chest ached. She hadn't expected this. The boy wasn't prying for stories. He was reaching for something else, for kinship in loss. And for the first time in years, she wanted to reach back. But her silence was heavier. Instead, she asked quietly, "Do you think the dead want us to carry them like anchors?" The corporal hesitated. "I don't know." His voice broke on the words. "I just don't want to forget him." She looked back at the ocean. "Forgetting isn't the danger," she murmured. "Remembering is." The boy shifted, uncertain how to respond. She almost him, too young to know that grief is not a wound to be healed but a companion that never leaves. The wind shifted, carrying salt and faint engine oil from the docks. She inhaled sharply, and for a moment she was back in the firestorm, black water, red sky, voices cut short. "Don't let go," he had said. But she had, and no salute could erase that truth. The corporal finally stepped back, sensing her withdrawal. "If you ever want to talk," he said awkwardly, "I'll listen." Then he turned, boots crunching against gravel, and disappeared toward the barracks. She remained by the fence, hand pressed against the ink on her wrist. For years she had lived in silence, but now 2 men in one day had pulled at the truth she had buried. And she knew it would not stop there, because she wasn't the only one who remembered that night. There were others, survivors, witnesses, and if one of them came forward, if one of them spoke the truth she had silenced, everything she had built would shatter. She stepped back from the fence, the horizon blurred by dusk. The ocean rolled on, indifferent, but inside her chest a storm was rising. And storms never stay quiet forever. Why was his name on the contractor's log? The list of names had been routine. She checked them every morning: painters, janitors, equipment techs, those assigned to the forgotten corners of the base like her. She wasn't supposed to care who came or went. Just show up, finish her doors, keep her head down. But this morning, a signature stopped her hand. "Jim." She stared at the clipboard like it had spoken. Yes. There had been a that night. The raft had been too small, the ocean too wide, had screamed at the pilot through the comms, "Hold the bird steady," while fire arced above them. His voice had cracked when the stretcher slipped. He had helped lift the wounded her from the wreckage. And now his name was here. She tightened her grip on the clipboard until her knuckles whitened. No photo, just a signature. No rank, just a contractor ID badge issued 3 days ago. 3 days. Long enough for him to have seen her. Long enough for him to have kept his distance. Long enough for him to decide what to do with what he knew. She set the clipboard down carefully, walked out into the light. The base buzzed around her, normal, unaware. Trucks moved along the motor pool lanes. Helicopter blades chopped faintly from the airfield. Somewhere, someone shouted cadence through drills. But beneath it all, she felt the thrum of something changing. She wasn't invisible anymore. She didn't see that day, not at first. But she felt him before she did. It was near the maintenance depot, behind the tool shed where rusted pallets leaned like drunken skeletons. She was touching up a peeling fire exit sign when a voice from behind said, "Lo, I thought it was you." She turned. He looked older, grayer at the temples, but the build was the same, solid, squared. His uniform was civilian now, like hers, with a badge clipped to his chest and calluses that matched hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then said, "You disappeared after the extraction." "I retired." "That's not what we called it." She met his eyes. "Then call it whatever you want." He looked down at the brush in her hand, the paint, the coveralls. His mouth moved like he wanted to say something else but didn't. "Finally, you saved him." Her hand clenched around the brush. "No, I tried." "You got him to the raft. You held him until we lifted out. And he died on the flight." Her voice cut the air clean. "I didn't save him. I was just the last one to watch him go." Stepped closer, but not too close, like he still wasn't sure if she'd bolt. "That mission," he began. "We all took losses, but you disappeared and no one ever really said why." Because they didn't know. Because command covered it, buried it, called it a routine casualty. Because she hadn't argued. Because she had wanted it that way. She didn't respond. He glanced at her wrist, at the faded ink barely visible under the cuff, then back to her face. "They're talking about you now," he said. "The salute, the seal, the recruits." She cursed under her breath. "I don't want attention." "Then maybe you shouldn't have done something worth remembering." The bitterness rose too quickly. "Do you remember the second one?" "Blinked what?" "The second diver," she said, barely louder than a breath. "The one who didn't make it." Silence. He didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't. "You know what they told me after," she went on. "They said I did everything right, that it was an impossible situation. That sometimes we lose two to save one, like that made it math, like it made it clean." She swallowed hard. Her throat was raw. "They gave me a medal," she said, "pinned it to my chest and asked me to smile for the camera, but I couldn't forget his face, the one I didn't save." Voice was quiet. "You think we don't all carry one of those?" She didn't answer. After a moment he shifted his stance. "You could reached out back then." "No," she said, "I didn't want to be found." "And now?" She looked away. "Now I just want to finish painting these damn doors." He nodded once. It wasn't agreement, it was understanding. But then his voice changed. Low, cautious. "There's something else. I didn't want to say it unless I was sure." Her spine stiffened. "I saw a name in the logs," said. "Medical transport detail. Arrived yesterday. Temporary clearance. Escorting a wounded veteran, double prosthetics." Her stomach twisted, and he hesitated. "The name's not common. Same last name as the diver we lost that night." Her breath caught. "He had a brother." Nodded, "Yeah." The world tilted. "I don't know if it's him," said. "Could be coincidence, but I thought you should know." She turned away sharply. She didn't want him to see the fear in her eyes. Because if that man, if the brother was here, then maybe the past wasn't just surfacing. Maybe it was coming for her. That night she sat in the barracks stairwell long after the last light flicked off. She hadn't done that in years, just sat. No brush, no walls to fix, no silence to hide behind. The SEAL's words echoed. Face, the clipboard, the ink on her wrist. And the question she had never dared ask out loud. What happens when the truth I buried comes walking back through the gate? She didn't sleep. And when morning came, she put on clean coveralls, tied her hair back and walked toward the admin building, not to paint, but to read the visitor log for herself. One name was all it would take. One name to unbury everything. Why was his name still legible after all these years? Her hand hovered above the logbook, the pen ink still wet from the morning sign-in. She had braced herself for it, told herself she wouldn't flinch if it was there. But when she saw the letters, clear and deliberate, her chest locked tight. J. The surname hit like a weight dropped into her gut. The diver who didn't make it, his last name had been. She remembered the dog tag slipping from her grasp as the waves pulled him down. She had whispered it then, clung to it through smoke and salt. And now here it was again. Her vision blurred. She forced her breath steady, tracing the rest of the line. Escort detail, veteran rehabilitation transport, double prosthetics, civilian clearance. It wasn't coincidence. Her stomach twisted. She closed the log, pressing the cover down hard as though the weight of her palm could smother the past. But the past had already walked onto the base. She didn't see him that morning. Not immediately, but whispers carried faster than footsteps. Two recruits on break muttered near the supply shed. You see him, both legs gone, still moves like he owns the place. Guy's tough, the other replied. Didn't even want the wheelchair, said crutches were faster. She listened, hidden behind a half-painted wall, her pulse loud in her ears. A brother here, in the same space where she'd been trying to disappear. She wasn't ready. She hadn't been ready then, and she wasn't now. But the base didn't wait for readiness. It was mid-afternoon when she finally saw him. She had been walking across the motor pool, brush and pail in hand, when a small crowd shifted near the medical transport van. At first, she only noticed the crutches, the deliberate, uneven rhythm of a man refusing to surrender pace. Then she saw his face. Yes. Older now, weathered, his jaw sharper, cheekbones hollow from years of something harder than time, but the resemblance was unmistakable, the same set to the eyes, the same stubbornness in the brow. He leaned against the crutches, refusing the hand a medic offered. His voice carried, low but firm. "I said I don't need a chair. I walked here, I'll walk back." She froze mid-step. The paint pail swung against her knee, sloshing quietly. Was there too, clipboard under one arm. His gaze flicked to her for only a second, then back to the veteran. No words passed, but she felt the weight of his warning. Not here, not yet. But it was already too late. Because eyes had lifted and found hers. It wasn't recognition, not right away. Just a glance, a stranger's pause. But then his gaze lingered, narrowed. He tilted his head slightly, as if reaching back through years to a place neither of them wanted to stand again. Her chest tightened. She forced herself to move, to keep walking, to be nothing more than a painter carrying tools. But when she passed, his voice carried after her. "Wait." She stopped. The crowd quieted, sensing something in the air. Slowly she turned. His eyes were locked on her wrist. The cuff had slipped, exposing the faded ink, wings and a trident, the emblem of the sea. Her heart pounded. He didn't speak for a moment. His jaw clenched once, twice, then rough as gravel. "You were there." The words struck harder than any accusation. She tried to answer, but her mouth was dry. She felt the paintbrush slick in her palm, sweat mixing with paint. Shifted, stepping between them, voice calm. "Maybe later. He's had a long ride." But's eyes didn't move from hers. "I remember," he said, louder this time. "I heard your voice. You were shouting his name." Her breath caught. She had shouted it over and over into the smoke and the waves. His name, his brother. And now it lived again, spoken here in daylight. The medic touched his arm gently. "Sir, let's get you inside." Exhaled slowly, the anger in his face softening into something sharper. Not hatred, not yet, but demand. "This isn't finished," he told her. Then he turned, moving toward the infirmary on crutches, every uneven step striking like a drumbeat in her chest. She stood rooted until the crowd dispersed, lingered, finally stepping closer, his voice low. "You can't outrun this anymore." She gripped the brush so hard the wood creaked. "I never ran, I buried it." "And now?" Her throat ached, she couldn't answer. Because the truth was clear. The past wasn't buried. It was standing, alive, on crutches in the infirmary. And sooner or later, it was going to ask her the question she feared most. Why didn't you save him? And she had no answer that could silence the sea. Why had she hoped he wouldn't come looking for her? She knew better. Men like him didn't let questions die. They carried them like wounds that never closed. It was late evening when she heard the uneven rhythm of crutches echoing down the corridor. The base had gone quiet, drills finished, mess hall cleared, night watch settling in. She had stayed behind, painting alone under fluorescent lights, thinking maybe the silence would hold a little longer. But it didn't. "Painter." His voice was rough but steady. She turned slowly. Stood framed in the doorway, sweat shining on his brow from the effort of crossing the long hall. His jaw was clenched tight, but his eyes burned with something deeper than anger. "Recognition." "You," he said. Her throat closed. She didn't answer. "You were there," he continued. "The fire, the water, my brother." She wanted to deny it, wanted to vanish into the paint, into the walls, into anything but this moment. But the ink on her wrist betrayed her, the limp in her step betrayed her, and the truth was already alive in his eyes. "Yes," she whispered. The word was small, but it carried like a gunshot. Moved closer, the rubber tips of his crutches thudding against the floor. "I knew it. I heard your voice in my dreams for years, shouting his name, holding him, and then nothing." She gripped the brush in her hand so hard the wood creaked. "I tried." "Did you?" His voice cracked. "Because all I ever heard was that he drowned, that nobody could reach him, that it was too late, but you," he jabbed a crutch toward her wrist. "You were there, you touched him, and he still died." Her chest ached. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Yes, he died in my arms." The words seemed to hit him harder than if she had shouted. His breath shuddered. He leaned against one crutch, dragging a hand across his face. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he asked the question she had feared most. "Why not him?" The air thinned. She closed her eyes. The memory rose unbidden, the cold waves, the burning sky, the stretcher slipping, two men reaching for her, one voice fatting faster than the other. "I had to choose," she said finally. Her voice was broken glass. "And I chose wrong." "Locked, wrong." "I saved one," she whispered, "and I let your brother go." Her hands trembled. She dropped the brush. It clattered against the concrete, leaving a smear of white. Stared at her, chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. "You think that's wrong," he said, voice low now. "You kept someone alive, you gave a family, a brother, a son, and you call that wrong." Her throat burned. "Because it wasn't him. Because I still see his face every time I close my eyes. Because I hear his last words, 'Don't let go.'" Her voice cracked. She pressed her palms against her temples as if she could crush the memory out. "And I did. I let him go." The silence stretched. When she looked up, his eyes weren't burning with anger anymore. They were wet, shining in the harsh light. "He said that." She nodded, unable to speak. For a moment the weight of it bent him forward. His crutches wobbled, and he caught himself against the wall, breathing hard. "That sounds like him," he said finally, voice breaking. "Always more worried about everyone else, even at the end." The ache in her chest deepened. Wiped his face roughly with the back of his hand. "You carried that all this time." She nodded again. His gaze held hers. "Then maybe it's time you stopped carrying it alone." She wanted to believe him, wanted to drop the silence she'd been holding for years, but the truth wasn't finished, not all of it. Because there was more to that night, something she hadn't spoken, something darker than a choice between two drowning men. Something she wasn't ready to confess. "Not yet." So she said only, "You don't understand." Leaned heavier on his crutches. "Then help me, make me understand." She looked down at the paint smeared across the floor, at the brush lying useless by her boots, at the ink on her wrist, faded but unyielding. Her voice was barely audible. "There are things you don't want to know." "Try me." She closed her eyes. The sea roared in her head, the fire, the screams, the moment she'd buried deeper than medals and scars. But her silence held. Finally exhaled, slow and heavy. "Then I'll wait, but I'm not leaving this base until I know the truth. About him, about you, about what really happened out there." His words lingered like a vow. Then he turned, crutches striking rhythm against the floor, carrying him back into the corridor. She stayed frozen in place, staring at the smear of paint. The silence around her was heavier than before. Because she knew he was right. He wouldn't leave without the truth. And when it came out, when the whole of it surfaced, it wouldn't just change how he saw her. It would change everything. Why did silence suddenly feel heavier than words? She sat alone in the stairwell long past midnight, knees drawn up, coveralls streaked with paint that had dried stiff against her skin. The base was quiet now, The kind of quiet that only came after lights out, when engines cooled, when boots stopped echoing, when the air itself seemed to pause. But inside her, the noise hadn't stopped. His face, his words, his eyes searching hers like they could pry the truth out of her chest. Then maybe it's time you stop carrying it alone. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But the truth wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about his brother. It was about the mission. About choices made in smoke and fire that had consequences no metal could scrub clean. And if she spoke it aloud, it wouldn't just haunt her. It would stain them all. Her hand drifted to her wrist, fingers tracing the faded ink. The trident, the wings, the emblem she had earned and then abandoned. She remembered the weight of the water, the weight of his body slipping, the split second when two hands had reached for her and she had chosen. But that wasn't all. There was more, a command given, a voice in her earpiece, a decision that had forced her hand. And if she told that, if she told anyone, the storm would break wide open. The next morning she went back to her work, painting doors, hiding in plain sight, each stroke steadier than her pulse. But the base wasn't the same anymore. Recruits passed her with curious glances now, not indifference. Some nodded, some whispered, respect maybe, or just rumor. The SEAL who had saluted her appeared in the corridor once, eyes meeting hers with the same quiet recognition. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to remind her that her silence wasn't just her own anymore. And he lingered near the maintenance sheds, always close enough to watch, never close enough to press. He was waiting just like. Especially, by the third day, she couldn't avoid him. He was waiting outside the infirmary, crutches planted firm, eyes locked on her as she approached with her paint cart. He didn't move aside, didn't look away. "You owe me the truth," he said. She stopped, the cart rattling to a halt. "I told you, I tried, I couldn't save him." "That's not the truth," said flatly. His voice was calm now, stripped of anger. "That's the story you've been feeding yourself for years, but it's not what really happened." Her chest tightened. He leaned closer, voice lowering. "I've talked too." He said there were orders that night, something about priorities, something about who got lifted first. Her stomach dropped. His eyes didn't waver. "Tell me, did they choose him, or did they leave him?" The air thinned. Her palms went slick. She wanted to lie, wanted to give him a clean story, a clean grief. But his gaze pinned her where she stood, and for the first time in years, she felt the walls of her silence cracking. Her voice came out rough. "They left him." The words hung in the air, heavier than any scream. His breath hitched, his knuckles whitened around the crutch handles. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "Command, they told us who to load first. Wounded officer, high-value asset. Your brother," she trailed off, unable to finish. His jaw clenched, so he was expendable. The word cut, she shook her head violently. "No, not to me, not to us, but to them, yes." His eyes blazed, "And you obeyed." Her chest ached. "I fought it. I held him as long as I could. I begged them to wait. But the bird was the fire spreading and they pulled us up. They made the call. I didn't have a choice." Her voice cracked, "But I still feel like I did." For a long moment said nothing. His face was stone, carved with grief and rage. Then finally he whispered, "All these years I thought he slipped away. I thought the sea took him." Her throat burned. "The sea didn't, command did." The words echoed, too sharp to take back. His grip on his crutches trembled. He turned away sharply, shoulders heaving, and for a moment she thought he'd collapse. But he steadied himself, voice hoarse. "Then don't tell me he drowned. Tell me he was sacrificed." Her eyes stung. "I can't say that." "Why not?" "Because it makes it true." The silence between them was thick, suffocating. Finally turned back, eyes glistening. "You think carrying that alone honors him. You think silence is dignity. No, dignity is truth, even when it tears you apart." She couldn't answer, couldn't breathe. The weight of his words pressed harder than the ocean ever had. Appeared in the distance then, slowing as he saw them. The seal, too, at the far end of the corridor, watching silently. The walls were closing in. Her silence wouldn't hold much longer. And she knew part of her wanted it to break. But the truth was sharp, dangerous. If she spoke it fully, it wouldn't just scar her. It would scar them all. His eyes locked on hers, fierce, unrelenting. "Next time," he said, voice steady, "don't tell me half of it. Don't tell me the version that makes it easier to breathe. Tell me everything, all of it, or I'll find it without you." Then he moved past her, crutches thudding against the concrete, leaving her standing in the corridor with paint-stained hands and a heart that felt like it was cracking open. That night she sat with the metal box she hadn't touched in years, opened it, stared at the ribbon, at the cold shine of recognition pinned to her silence. And for the first time she whispered into the empty room, "Forgive me." But no answer came, only the memory of waves. And the truth still waiting, heavier than ever. Why did the truth always wait until it could hurt the most? She had managed to avoid him for 2 more days, painting doors, fixing walls, pretending the base was the same as before, pretending silence could still hold. But silence has limits. On the 3rd evening, he came for her again. The mess hall was empty, lights humming above cold steel tables. She had stayed late, repainting the back door where rust crept up from the hinges. The brush dragged steady strokes when she heard the uneven rhythm of crutches approaching. "Enough," said. His voice was tired, not angry. "You've kept me circling in shadows long enough. Tell me everything." Her hand froze, paint dripped onto the floor. Slowly she set the brush down. He stood across the room, framed by the doorway. His face was drawn, weary, but his eyes didn't waver. Behind him, leaned against the wall, silent. And farther back, near the entrance, the seal who had saluted her once before stood like a sentinel. No escape, no more silence. She drew a long, shaky breath. "You want the truth," her voice trembled, "then hear it all." She told them about the smoke that night, about the chopper hovering low, its rotors kicking fire across the water, about 2 men clutching at her vest, one bleeding, one drowning, and the voice in her earpiece crackling with command. "Prioritize the officer, get him out, leave the other if you have to." She had screamed into the comms, begged for more time, but the fire spread. Fuel licked the waves. The bird couldn't hover longer without risking all of them. And in the chaos she had to choose. She had chosen the officer. Not because she wanted to, not because brother mattered less, but because orders came sharp, final, and she obeyed. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I held him. I swore I wouldn't let go, but when they pulled me up I had to release his hand. I watched him sink, and I've carried that weight every day since." Her eyes blurred, her chest heaved. "I didn't just lose him," she said. "I lost myself that night. The Navy gave me medals, but they couldn't give me back what I let the sea take." The silence after her words was suffocating. His face was pale, jaw trembling, looked down at the floor. The seal's fists clenched at his sides. Finally spoke, voice raw. "So my brother died because of a call sign, because command said he was worth less." She flinched. "He wasn't worth less, not to me, not to us. He fought like hell and her voice broke. I failed him." "No," his voice shook, but it carried. "You didn't fail him. You kept him alive longer than anyone else could. You carried him until you couldn't anymore. He died with someone holding him, not alone, not forgotten." Her breath caught, tears burned her eyes. Stepped forward, voice steady. "He's right. We all knew the risk. We all knew command makes calls we don't agree with. You bore the weight of that alone because you stayed silent. But silence doesn't mean failure." The seal finally spoke, his voice deep, sure. "Respect isn't about who walks away, it's about who's remembered. and your silence remembered him more than medals ever could. She bowed her head, tears streaking down paint-stained skin. I didn't want his brother to hate me. Moved closer, uneven on his crutches. I don't hate you. I hate the war that made you choose. I hate the command that measured my brother's life against another. But you, his voice faltered. You gave me something no report, no medal, no file ever could. You gave me his last words. She swallowed hard. Don't let go, he whispered. His eyes shone. That sounds like him. That's how I'll remember him now. Not drowned, not abandoned, but fighting till the last breath with someone who refused to let him go until she had no choice. Her shoulders shook, she couldn't speak. Reached out, hand trembling, gripping her forearm. Not in accusation, not in anger, but in recognition. For the first time in years, she let someone hold the weight with her. Later, when the hall had emptied and she was alone again, she picked up the brush she'd dropped. She dipped it in paint, pressed it steady to steel. The strokes came smooth, deliberate like breathing. The silence felt different now. Not absence, not exile, but presence. She knew the guilt would never leave, knew the ocean would always echo in her bones, but the burden wasn't hers alone anymore. Some truths once spoken don't vanish. They linger but lighter because they are carried together. She glanced at her wrist, at the faded emblem etched into her skin. For years she had hidden it. For years it had marked her with loss. But tonight it felt like something else. A reminder, a promise. That honor doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.